I hear, I forget. I see, I remember, I do, I understand. That's a wonderful way to orient people to the life of the disciple of Jesus and say, so because come and see, right, is the dominant invitation to those who are curious about it. So.
What's up, guys? It's Josiah. This is the Young Adults Today podcast. Micah and I just got back from Houston, Texas, where we were presenting at the CMN Conference Church Multiplication Network. Conference had us in to teach a breakout session called Discipleship Pathways for Young Adults, and spending time in Texas with over 2,000 church planters was invigorating. We believe the best churches might not have even been planted yet, and this is why we're really excited to team up with our friends at Rocket Media. Rocket Media has developed the Church Plant Masterclass, and you can receive 50% off of the entire series. The entire course is available at churchplantmasterclass.com. The link is in the show notes, and you'll receive 50% off with the promo code YAT50. Again, that's YAT50 at churchplantmasterclass.com. And today's conversation is also presented by our partners at GFA World. GFA World is an amazing global nonprofit, and if you want to discover more about their paid apprenticeship program, where they have a heart for every generation and every nation, more details are available at gfa.org. The link is also in the show notes. And now onto our conversation about spirituality in a secular society with Blaine Eldredge right here on the Young Adults Today podcast.
Well, what's up, guys? We hope you're feeling alive right now. I'm Micah Kennealy.
I'm Josiah Kennealy. We're your hosts. This is the Young Adults Today podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you. We consider it a gift for when you subscribe, leave us a rating and review, and share this with others who might be encouraged by the message. Today, we are joined as we drop new episodes every single Monday to help you start your week and your leadership off strong. Our guest is Blaine Eldredge. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. Such an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you, and we are going to be diving in deep with a fun conversation. Yeah. I'm fascinated. Talking to you before we hit record, I was like, dang, we should have just hit record, but we're going to be honing in on spirituality in a secular society and just in a culture like we're living in today. Blaine's one of the voices that we want to draw from, and he is a teacher and a writer from Peyton, Colorado for the past decade. He has built platforms to help the church thrive in late modernity. Blaine loves to read, write, talk about culture and history and theology, and really loves to contemplate on the gospel and make resources to convey its astonishing beauty. And I mean, sheesh, let's go. Blaine, we'll kick it to you. Tell us some of your journey today.
Thank you, guys. Well, let's start with the beautiful, because some of my journey into following Jesus at all happened through not the truth first, not the goodness first, but the beauty of the gospel. I grew up as a bizarre homeschool kid. I'm the grandson of traveling salesmen. My family is honestly quite Anglo-German, but we are Irish in our sympathies. In fact, the Irish part of the family came over fleeing the potato famine, bought land in Eastern Oregon, spent the family fortune irrigating the property, dug the reservoir over basalt rock, and literally watched the fortune drain into the ground. And after that point, the family went to urban centers, working in the shipyards of San Francisco. That survives in my family. There is a sense of us against the world. There is also a sense of being far from home and on a journey. And then there is the gift of being a lifetime outsider, which all people to a certain extent are. No one likes being an outsider, but when we're able to own it, we realize it's such a gift to see the cultures that we operate inside of from a unique angle. So I started to experience the goodness of Jesus when my parents started to host a church in our house, and I got a front row seat to the power of the Holy Spirit to change people. When there's a proverb, sort of a debated history that goes, I hear, I forget. I see, I remember, I do, I understand. That's a wonderful way to orient people to the life of the disciple of Jesus and say, because come and see, right, is the dominant invitation to those who are curious about it. So my family modeled so much of the power of Jesus to change the state of things, to increase joy, to heal people who were sick, to restore the heart. At the same time, I started playing make-believe through the history of the Roman Empire when I was probably about 7, starting with Romulus and Remus, going through the imperial phase, and then kind of ending with the dissolution of Rome in the 500s. Didn't know that was nerdy. When you're homeschooled, you kind of develop a little homeschool enclave with other people in the city who are also homeschooled. So we would jokingly call ourselves, oh, we're homeschool losers, but we're really not, because we know we're cool. And then time passes and you see photos of yourself in a tie-dye shirt and socks and sandals and stuff that's cool now, but wasn't then, and realize, oh man, you were a beautiful oddity. And I'm so glad you had no idea how bad the situation was at the time. But having a heart that is sensitive to history and that is sensitive to wonder, to beauty, to the spiritual realm, positions a person quite well to understand and approach the offer of Christianity, which is a definitive story about the nature of history, which is an interpretive lens through which to understand the spiritual realm, which has an incredible tradition. So I think that also some of the weirdness of my family, our background, my brothers, homeschool work together to make the offer of Jesus understandable and desirable.
That's so good. Well, here's just something to put everybody's mind at ease. We are all a beautiful mess in God's eyes. No matter where we've come from, no matter what our family tree looks like, we are all a beautiful mess in his eyes. And he's the perfecter and author of our stories. And so that's something to really lean into, and leaning into not only the history or the heritage of the church, but even before we hit record, you talked about 3 possibilities and what could happen in the near future with the church. You shared 3 possibilities before we hit record. Are you willing to unpack those for the audience once more?
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to talk about that again. I've hosted podcasts for a long time. So like you guys, I know that sometimes these gems get dropped before the record button gets hit. And whenever I listen to a show and the people say, we were talking beforehand, I go, man, why didn't you just, as soon as they walked in the room? But we were talking beforehand, and saying that it is vital for the disciples of Jesus, in whatever context they are in, to understand the big threads of the church in their time. What is history doing? Movements, cultures, nations do not age and develop at the same rate as humans, so it can be hard to keep track. What is happening? Where are we? But fortunately, the church has been equipped with all kinds of writers, thinkers, podcasters, people who observe these things. So let me tell you, if you don't know, that if you are in the West, if you're following Jesus in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, and New Zealand, you are living in a time of catastrophic decline. I use catastrophic on purpose. The thing is that over the past 20 years, there has been a 50% reduction, falling away of the people actively following Jesus. I reached out to one of the organizations that does that research. They're called Barna. If you don't know them, you should know Barna, friends. They are a gift to the church in our time, and they produce wonderful data, but they have a state of the church survey that they've been doing for several years. I was so shocked by the data that I asked them, what is happening? I'm looking at the numbers, and is this decline population change, right? Is this young people who aren't encountering Jesus? Is this just the overall, growth of the country? And they said, what you got to know is that we're seeing declines in the same kind of rate across demographics. So elders are leaving faith in Jesus at the same rate as boomers, at the same rate as Xers, at the same rate as millennials, at the same rate as Gen Z. So that's pretty astonishing, right? Why is that happening? And it's happening across the developed world. But if you're a fan of history, every once in a while you run into something called a population collapse. And it's where you lose so many people at one time that the normal gears of culture fail, right? The mechanisms of social change don't function properly. So, man, if you're following Jesus right now and it feels to a certain extent like the wheels are coming off, friends, they are. And it's actually encouraging to know that the church has ebbed and flowed across time. God has always been at work in his people. Sometimes you're living in eras of rapid expansion. Sometimes you're living in times like the 30 Years' War in Europe, where 30% of the population is going to die, not just fall away from faith in Jesus, but disappear. But it does shape our practice. So I was saying beforehand that really right now, there are three possibilities for the church. Option one, Jesus comes back in our time. We are recording the show in Advent. Obviously, it will air later, but we are in a time of putting a fresh edge on our desire for Jesus to come back. Option two, there's a revival. That is possible. We could see something like the Great Awakening, where the Holy Spirit begins to move in a country, and all of a sudden, we're sending emails not on, man, how do we help young people engage in a secular culture? And it's, hey, our entire high school just started following Jesus. What do we do? I would love to get that email. Okay, so Jesus comes back, option one. There's a revival, option two. Option three, you prepare a remnant for a time of decline. You vouchsafe the gospel for a future generation. And I was telling my wife about this in the car. I was telling her about my deep love of King Josiah, who lived, in an ascendant time of the Neo-Babylonian Empire around 600 BC. And this is what we got to know, is that Josiah knew it was all going to burn. We have people who have a hard time feeling like their life's work is going to matter because it's going to disappear when they're gone. What if you knew for sure it was? Josiah knows. He has prophets as his companions, Jeremiah, Huldah, and he knows that the judgment on Judah that's going to come through Babylon is not going to be averted. And he does it anyway. He goes all in to display the beauty of Jesus and purify a nation. And what happens is that several generations later, in exile, these young people show up, right? The three holy children, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and then Daniel, they're probably 13, 14, 15 years old. They get the equivalent of the Babylonian university education. They're embedded in the power dynamics, culture, economy of one of the great world powers. And they're faithful to God Most High. They haven't lost the plot line. Josiah is getting up to pray 3 times a day. And if you look at people like that, you have to ask the question, who formed them? Okay, where did you learn to do that? And to answer that question, you have to say, well, to understand how the gospel survived in exile, you have to go back a couple generations to a group of older people, some of them quite old. I mean, Hilkiah, Shaphan, those guys are venerable, aging, relics of an earlier age by the time Josiah rolls onto the scene. But they go for it anyway. And the result of that is that in the return, in the intertestamental period, by the time Jesus rolls onto the scene, the story of God and the testimony of God's presence in history is preserved. The promise survives. So I do tell people that might be your job, okay? If we don't see a revival, it is your job, which is to go all in, even though it may burn, so that a future generation will reap the reward of your investment.
Oh my gosh.
So good.
Blaine, this fires me up because this is all of our story. This is the shared narrative of the people of God, that the gospel can be passed on even into exile. That I love what you describe of raising up a remnant as one of the possibilities. Like Jesus might come, what revival or awakening could come, but no matter what, we're going to live the same, and we're going to raise up a remnant. We're going to do discipleship and be obedient faithful to the commands of God and obey his word. But on a personal note, my parents named me Josiah Daniel.
Oh my gosh. Josiah Daniel, you got both of them?
Yep. And just this past year and a half, I was at an event and nobody was asking John Tyson any questions. And he's the pastor of Church in the City out of New York City. And I just said, hey, what are you dreaming about? What are you fired up about? What gives you the juice? And he goes, I'm working on Josiah. And then he unpacks what you just unpacked, and my mind is blown. And so I haven't been able to really leave that in some of my study and quiet time of just like dissecting some of what you just said. And I know you kind of time-stamped our recording. We're at the end of 2023. About to jump into 2024, but I don't know if you saw this, but to wrap up the calendar year of 2023, Gallup Research just put out a report this past week, just reported that millennials now form the largest demographic of weekly churchgoers and monthly church attenders, and church attendance among millennials is actually surging. Have you seen this? What's your take on that?
Yeah, this is, it tells a coherent story, and it's pretty fascinating. So Gallup, I love the research. Pew for the global research is definitely one to know about. Just in terms of a reach, they're able to sample so widely. I think a couple things. I think that these pockets of fomenting are not in vain. I mean, there are professionals who could parse that out and what happens in terms of instability versus faith, even time of year, all of these things. At the same time, I would look again at option 2. And you mentioned John Tyson. Oh, man, there's just one figure who really is going all in for, we don't actually want decline. If we have to shepherd decline, we will. Right? That's the beautiful thing of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're but if not. One of my favorite lines in the Bible is, our God could save us, but if not, we won't do it anyway. So there is a but if not of the church, but for sure, what we are going for is to see a move of God, so that there are numbers. The interesting thing about them, we will have to see that continue to reverse these decade-long trends, these century-long trends, but it's possible. So I would say, man, that should stir hope. That should stir faith. And if you're one of those people who is calling on God to move in our time, you should look at that number and say, go, go, go. There is a lot. History has an incredible amount of inertia, right? It doesn't change direction very quickly, but it does change direction. And so to ask God, roll back that life lived apart from God can be so filled with despair. It is, out of a desire to see people thrive, that we want to see the fame of God renewed. Right. So to see a number like that, it's not just like, yes, our team is winning. It's like, the human heart can know peace. Families can bear the fruit of the Spirit. Children can receive a good inheritance. Everything that is good about God's universe can be enjoyed and displayed. So those are hopeful numbers. And I pray actually every day with my family that we will see trends like that begin to pop up.
Yeah.
For sure. I think the exact figure is, it says 39% of millennials report attending church weekly, up from 21% in 2019. So we're still dealing with the minority, the remnant, but 18%, I mean, that's something that's, to me,
That's a
that's
huge number. Yeah.
I mean, that's almost a double. And so, I mean,
In 4 years.
just, yeah, and a lot of it is more recent. So I do pay attention to that. And I mean, one can kind of speculate, like, I wonder if it's a lot of our friends, we're both millennials, Mike, and a lot of our friends are having kids, and then they're millennials. So, I mean, I wonder if part of it is like, oh,
they're going back to their childhood roots, I think.
I wonder if that can play a role.
Yeah.
But I mean, certainly I think it's something to pay attention to, and it just fired me up. So I thought it might be worth sharing with you too.
Yeah. Well, I think also
good
with
news
that
is good news.
So good. Well, I think with that, even as taking into consideration, I think COVID had a huge play in that, because we have so many friends that found Jesus during COVID. They're like, well, we're all in lockdown, we're all at home. So we're like, what does this faith thing actually mean and look like? And now there's some of the most on fire people that we were able to surround ourselves with. And it's only been like 2.5, 3 years since they've said yes. And what they're really realizing, I don't want to speak for them, but my observation is this through our friendship, many of them are realizing like, whoa, we have been a byproduct of somebody else's fruit. And now that we have Christianity, excuse me, on our family tree, we get to pick and choose how our family tree grows and moves forward. So even looking at like the story of Daniel, my prayer is that we truly do, as leaders, as influencers, as authors, as podcasters, whoever, if we are claiming Christianity and Jesus at the center of everything, are we, and are the people that we're leading, are we able to stand when everybody else bows? And are we willing to bow when everybody else stands? Like, are we willing to swim against the cultural currents? And are we willing to put ourselves in that position to say, I'm going to be outspoken about my faith and love Jesus and love people like he did, not in a way to win people over for our name's sake, but to build his kingdom and not our own. So with that tension of swimming against the current and leading and bowing and standing and bowing, when, you know, like it's a flesh and spirit tug of war. So I'd be so curious, Blaine, when it comes to like secularism and spirituality, do you find that people are more open to the gospel? Why or why not? Because there's two things always at war. It's the flesh and it's the spirit, and it's secular and it's spiritual. So can you unpack that, or do you have any insight?
Thank you. Great question. I love talking about these things. Well, I would say, I would start with, let's establish some context. All right, let's look at where we are and what secularism is, what it has done. You know, if I'm sure that most of our friends listening have some familiarity with, you know, Charles Taylor and his great work, A Secular Age, and what he's done to kind of explain what has happened. But it has such a long history. So are people more open to the gospel? Well, the philosopher Martin Heidegger made a brilliant observation and early on, and he said the problem for people navigating the world, and ultimately he was anticipating the age of the authentic self and the idea that reality was discovered rather than revealed, is he said the world is just there. He called it the brute facticity of reality. I love that term. It's so muscular, and it says it's just there. If you've ever tripped on the stairs because you thought there was going to be one more stair, you know that no amount of individual belief that there's one more stair is going to make one appear. It's just not there. The fascinating thing is that the spiritual realm and the presence of God is real. And so eventually you bump into it, though cultures can gaslight themselves for a really long time. What Charles Taylor observed is that cultures establish what he called immanent frames. You find something like this in almost every discipline, which is that people, cultures, civilizations decide what parts of reality they're going to go ahead and say that exists, right? So families do this, and we call it gaslighting, when they just don't talk about, you know, mom's anxiety or dad is a workaholic, and then, you know, you get out of the house and get into therapy and realize that was never talked about, but we always felt it. In Western civilization, we've done that with the spiritual world really since the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment is a response to a decadent form of medieval Christianity, which I'd love to get into at some point, but I'll say we are living in a long intellectual tradition that has worked to cut the spiritual out of life and to deny its existence, sometimes with brilliant rhetorical devices, really brilliantly packaged ideas that have the appearance of truth while still being false. But the spiritual realm is there, so you can only resist reality for so long. And last week, I was having the country some work done, so I had some heavy equipment operators on my place. One got there early, invited him in for coffee, and we're talking. And I noticed he had like a pentagram tattoo, so I was asking him about that. And he was talking about how, well, I'm an agnostic and I hate Christians, and this is, I think, a wonderful place to start a conversation. So we start talking and just asking questions. And by the middle of the conversation, we're at that brute facticity plane, right? I'm asking, really, you think that the sum total, everything that exists, can be described in terms of material? What about things that for sure have no material expression, like history? I mean, that's rooted in fact, but it cannot be observed. What about you've never had a spiritual experience, and finally, even someone deeply antagonistic, when they're actually being invited to describe their experience with a vocabulary that makes sense, starts to say, well, I have had some things that I can't quite explain. Well, that's a great beginning. I mean, then how about just the deep sense that you're beloved by God? Have you ever had that feeling come out of nowhere, the deep homesick ache that can't quite be accounted for that exists in all people? Have you ever had that? So secularism is failing in our time because it has not saved humanity. And whenever a regime fails, there's a risk of incredible despair. And what secularism has not done is it has not saved the planet. It has not healed nations. It has not restored human beings. And so two things I think are happening. On the one hand, we just need to know, as people who are trying to strengthen the church in our time, there's a kind of like when a ship starts to sink and the ripples go out, there will be a kind of, there and already is a kind of resignation of defeat and anguish that needs tending to. At the same time, as people are beginning to range around, I was fascinated reading, epigenetics in the therapeutic world. And I was reading about the, internal family systems method, which is, this kind of amazing tool that's been developed over the last 40 years inside the therapeutic community. Really popular. Well, what they realized while doing IFS was that they were encountering, parts in people that didn't seem to be them. And they were trying to figure out what to do with that. They eventually named them legacy burdens. And I read a paper that said, hey, we're just trying some stuff to heal people, but what we're pulling on is shamanism. I thought that's fascinating. That tool corresponds to the real to a certain extent, but it's not going to work as well as looking at a concept like iniquity. Like the Christian tradition is a wonderful way to talk about and address inherited evil that you're discovering empirically in your therapeutic practice, but you don't have a worldview that positions you to address it. So you're starting to range around kind of the, in quote, spiritual stuff, looking for what to do. And at a time like that, being well acquainted with the Christian tradition, being well acquainted with the gospel, just positions us to say, oh, hey, I actually think that what you're observing is true. Intergenerational trauma, legacy burdens, all of that is totally real. I don't think that you should interact with these ancestral spirits, as you call them, apart from the covering of Jesus, or maybe at all. let me tell you about a toolkit that comes out of the Christian tradition that exists under the covering of Jesus that works to heal people. So I realize that's a huge monologue, guys. I'm sorry. You can feel compassion for my wife now, but that's some of what I see going on in a secular, post-secular moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And to put it, my mind is not wired like yours. And I love your verbiage. I love all of that. But I just think this is my mind thinking very, very simple. If I get in a plane and they're 1 degree off, we end up in a different destination. And I think sometimes with our faith and our beliefs, if we are 1 major degree off that Jesus Christ is Lord, if you don't believe that Jesus Christ is Lord, he died on the cross, he came as fully man, fully God, that's 1 major degree off. And I think sometimes when we're dealing with the secularism and the spiritual sense, like we can think we're encountering something, but it's not fully truth. It's not fully God. And you're even tapping into that, even in the therapeutic world, of saying like, hey, yes, generational curses, legacy things, like these are all things that we can definitely take a look at, but bringing in the 1 thing that can heal anybody's ailment is Jesus, is a personal relationship with Jesus. And we know the enemy is out to kill, steal, destroy any and all concepts of who we are and where we've come from, and from our identity to family dynamics and all of that. So even just taking it 1 step deeper, Blaine, I'd be so curious to see, you have young children, 3 and 7. They're soon going to be young adults before you even know it. 18, 19, 20 is going to feel like a blink of an eye. So when it comes to young adult ministry, do you believe, or why do you believe that young adult ministry is so vital in this day and age?
Wow. I want to ask you that question back because I know that we're in your wheelhouse right now, but I am with you. It is so vital. We just have to, I would start that answer with what Dallas Willard described at the end of the 20th century as the failure, frankly, of many expressions of Christianity, many streams of the Western Christian tradition, the failure of those things to shape people into the likeness of Christ. And, I'll be the first to say that these things are very complex. I was just reading a wonderful book. It's called The Love That Is God, Bauerschmidt, Catholic scholar, brilliant writer. And he was saying, what do we do with the love of Jesus when so many of his people display such unlovely faces to the world? And I said, man, that really is the question in our time of what happened in the way that we followed Jesus and expressed faith in Jesus that failed to change people so often. Now, obviously not completely, and I love the Western Christian traditions, and I'm here because older people were transformed by Jesus and I saw it happen. At the same time, it's causing a generation of people, including myself, to ask, how do people change? How are people formed? What is the best way to live? And I look at my kids, and we have to start with my heart as a parent is for courage and joy and virtue. I want them to experience the beauty of God's universe. I want them to be deeply anchored and kind of immovable as they navigate interpersonal relationships. I mean, it was just 7, and some of the complexity of the things that are happening with our friends, I scratch my head and go, man, I forgot that it happened this quickly. You're so smart, and what you're navigating, actually, yeah, it bears on some really important things. So my passion for young people, and some of my favorite people in our church context are all of the kind of like 10 to 15-year-olds who are just like burgeoning with the energy of young adulthood. It's so awesome. And I go, man, you guys are precious to God. You are living in a difficult time. You're living in a moment of upheaval in terms of the Christian faith as it exists in the West. And I really want it to go well for you. it can be as simple as, because I would like you to thrive. We want to see you do well. And that actually means answering some pretty good, big questions like, what is our vision for the good life? And how does that reflect Jesus's vision for the good life? How do we think someone gets there, right? Why do we think that will work? Whenever I'm orienting someone, someone's coming into our church and I'm doing hey, kind of here's what we do things. I do, okay, so we're going to be shaped by what Dallas Willard called the vision, intention, and means, essentially, with a slight adaptation, which is like, where are we going? Because we have to be defined by what's the desire. So guys, our desire is to make it on earth as it is in heaven, to restore the human heart, to overthrow spiritual evil, the entire kingdom project. How we're going to get there is the life of the disciple, and the way we think that will work, which is our source of authority and your structure of appeal, is why we think that will work is the testimony of the scriptures, the presence of the Holy Spirit in the history of the church. But you will need all of these things because of the pressures on humanity right now. And I'll end this monologue by saying, there are two extremes. The sociologist Charles Taylor said, there's always the Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun, and then there's the sky is falling, civilization is ending. Well, listen, right now, we are closer to what they call in systems theory regime change, which it's enough to say you're actually living through a really hard time, people. You're living through a time that in most disciplines, history, mathematics, people would point to and say, man, that's actually just going to be hard on your psyche. When you're living in a time that the World Health Organization has declared a global mental health crisis, we can say with confidence that it's not easy to be alive right now. And so it's so important to prepare young people in particular to thrive in a moment like this one. But what would you add? I mean, I'm curious what that sparks for you, because this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, babe.
Why is it important to shape young people right now?
Man, I think that the faith of the next generation, we believe, is worth everything. And so efforts that are discipling the next generation, this is what Jesus did. This is what it's all about. And we come back to, often our theme verse is Psalm 145:4. One generation is to tell the next about the marvelous deeds of God.
Yeah.
And so I think that my burden, Blaine, my passion, our shared passion, and I know for the listener, they jump on board and they're fired up about this. Like, we just think that, man, if there's an absent generation, like if you had Thanksgiving last month, or if you had Christmas and you found out that maybe your sibling or your sister or one of your family wasn't coming, would you pay attention to that at all? Like, I just think that this is what you have on a large scale. If we're talking among millennials, 40% are maybe a part of the kingdom of God, checking things out, attending church, things like that. And among Gen Z, it's even lower. I mean, I want to do something about that. Like, we feel passionate about calling a generation and provoking them to affection in Jesus, and then provoking church leaders to action, saying like, this is all hands on deck. To borrow some of your phrases from earlier at the episode, you're talking about, man, if a ship is going down, or if there's a population collapse, or, to give it a little context, we're calling people to action to say, we got to disciple the next generation. And if they're in one sense, I think they're right where we want them to discover, like, gosh, life is meaningless apart from Christ. Elon Musk tweeted, gosh, like earlier this week, he said, like, a couple nights ago, this is the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, owner of Twitter, all those things. This is what he said: we are microbes on a dust mote in a vast emptiness, overwhelmingly dominated by the sun. And I go, okay, Elon, you have billions of dollars, close to $1 trillion. Solomon arrived at a similar conclusion, that the book of Ecclesiastes, that life is meaningless. But I just believe God's the giver of life. He's the giver of meaning to life. There's hope, and his name's Jesus. And so, I mean, this is our passion.
Yes, and I would say to Elon Musk, first of all, God bless you. Oh, how terrible to live in a story like that one. And then after that, to quote Will Smith's character from The Legend of Bagger Vance, that's about the dumbest dumb thing I've ever heard a person tweet. It's a bad story, but it's so untrue, and it is not ethically neutral. Okay. So to put an idea like that one out from someone like Elon Musk into a moment like ours can do great harm to the world, despite the fact that I could go out on the street and I could yell as loudly as I wanted to. There's no such thing as trees. You know what? Trees don't care. They're still there. You can say we are dust motes, and we're actually still souls that were ultimately designed by God to share in the life of the Trinity. We still live in a universe whose ultimate author is God the Father, whose plan for the fullness of time is to reconcile all things to himself through Christ. The universe is not made to die, it's made to increase when we share with God in the work of the Trinity, co-creating into eternity following the return of Christ. That's the story that we live in, and it's so much better and just more true. It is truer than what our friend Elon Musk tweeted, though I sincerely hope Jesus encounters him in a vision or dream soon, because it would do his heart so much good.
Well, and I think that that's a prime thing of like, whether you're him or you're 13 years old having these questions, and you feel like life is meaningless, there's nothing to do. And I was literally getting ready this morning. I was like, Lord, my heart is just so heavy for the broken today. Like just the broken, the lost, the people who just don't know Jesus like they could or should. And I wrote this down. It's like, we are all broken, believer, non-believer. We are all broken, but we don't need to be lost. Why? Because we have Jesus. When we are found in him, we are no longer lost. You will live with purpose. You will live on purpose, and you will have a reason to get up in the morning and not say, oh, woe is me. What does this day have to offer? No, God, what have you set up for me to do? And what am I going to accomplish, or who am I going to encounter in your name's sake that's going to build your kingdom and not my own? So it's like, I think like if we're going to talk about medieval times, or we're going to talk about like J.R.R. Tolkien or anybody who's in that sphere of like supernatural animals and encounters and like Christ-like characters and the villains and the devil and all that kind of stuff. I love that because it makes you get your short sword out in the morning, and it makes you sharpen it. It makes you get into word of the God. So when you do come up against the enemy during that day, or the people who need hope, you have something to offer them, or you have a villain to fight. And I think so many times we play victim when we live for the victorious one and we have his strength. The living Holy Spirit that rose Jesus Christ from the dead is like indwelling in all of us. And if we could just wrap our minds around that every single moment of every single day, when we forget that we are broken, yeah, we're broken. But guess what? We're a beautiful mess in God's eyes. And we can be broken, but that does not mean we have to be lost. So what we need to do as Christ followers, we need to reach out to the lost to tell them, yeah, I'm broken too, me too, but there's a God in heaven who sees you, who knows you, who loves you, who's going to encourage your soul, get you out of bed in the morning for purpose, on purpose. And if there's breath in your lungs, like there's still time for you. There's still a purpose for you. There's still something to be done. And I guess that's what fires us up, is like saying, no, we're as young adult ministry leaders going to sit at the intersection of heaven and hell and say, this is the way to Jesus. You're going the wrong way. This is the way to Jesus. And we're going to call you out in truth and out in love. So I'm going to call a generation out and up in love and truth each and every single day that God gives me the opportunity. And anytime I feel discouraged, I go back to that verse. If they deny you, it's because they denied me first. The words of Jesus. If they hate you, it's because they hated me first. And I think that just spurs me on. I'm like, I need to live. I love action movies. So now I'm just on a tangent, but I love action movies. When you get up, you're like, okay, what is the mission? What does God have in store? And when you posture your heart in that position before him every single day, Lord, surprise me. God, divinely interrupt me, drop me to my knees, break my heart for what breaks yours, and help me to see people and love people like you would, not how I want to, because there's moments where it's like, oh, this is a little inconvenient and not very comfortable. We're not called to live comfortably as Christians. And this is something we've adopted in our house. Josiah says this. He goes, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think as leaders in this day and age where we are in this universal crisis on so many different levels, we can either scream like Henny Penny, the sky is falling, or we can look up and say, God, you're still seated on the throne, or Jesus, you're still seated on the right hand of the Father. You're still on your throne. You're still in control, and you are coming back. And let us help prepare that way. And to do that, we need to disciple people so they know who they are and whose they are in Christ. So when the enemy comes knocking, God, you got this. I'm not even opening that door. So I have no idea how or why I said all that, but maybe that was for somebody.
Oh, Micah, that was epic. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Maybe that's the answer to the question. That's the fire in me.
I think you let it rip there. It's great. Love hearing your passion. And
funny.
I've been learning about parenting both experientially and just studying it. And I think it's been said, Blaine, that whoever tells the best story wins.
Yes.
And I know storytelling, reading, writing, learning, and the beauty, the majesty, the vastness of God. Like, we as Christ followers, we've hit on it a couple of times. We have the best story, and it's powerful. And you've just written a message called The Paradise King. What is your hope for the listener today?
Do you know what Cassius Clay, aka Muhammad Ali's trainer, would shout when he started to lose a fight? Do you know this story?
Man, it rings a bell, but I'm drawing a blank.
It'll come back to you. So, Muhammad Ali, one of the great boxers of this generation. You're only as great as the team behind you. And he had a trainer who was a fascinating character and a brilliant student of human nature. And when Muhammad Ali started to lose, he wouldn't give technical advice. He would start to pound the mat and yell, "Go to the well. Go to the well, Muhammad. Go to the well once more." That's his famous line. Go to the well once more. And the exhortation, to the follower of Jesus, even the leader right now, is go to the well. We have the best story. Can we say with honesty that we know what that is? Are you honestly satisfied with the measure of your experience of God? And I don't mean to be the guy that's saying, like, want more, but I'm just saying God is stirring desire in me, and God is stirring desire in my church and so many people I know to see his face, to recover the old things. Jeremiah 6:16, stand at the crossroads. If you want to know what's happening in the ancient world, what armies are moving, what messengers are on horses on the road, go to the intersection of the great highways, look at the Old King's Highway or the Via Maris or something like that, and then ask what the ancient way is and walk in it. What I tried to do in the book, which I never meant to write, I wanted to talk about history with my less interested friends and to convey something that I was seeing in the Bible, which happened at a time I wasn't sure I wanted to follow Jesus anymore, happened at a time of death. That what an old English cardinal named John Henry Newman called the illative sense turned on. So I was reading the Bible. All of a sudden, this capacity that all people have to sense when they are in the presence of something holy and wonderful turned on like it had been dialed up to 11. And I could feel this current. And, I'd been Christian a long time. I've been a student of the scriptures for a very long time. I don't know why it happened that day, but all of a sudden, the depth, the psychological brilliance, the drama of the biblical story started to come online, but I didn't know what I was seeing. So I started to look and read the old things. It's something Jesus is doing in the church in our days. There's an amazing recovery of things like patristic tradition, spiritual formation, stage theory, these ancient ideas that experienced, shall we say, a generational lapse after the Protestant Reformation are being returned to the church. God is doing it. So I wrote what I was finding, in kind of one story after another, until I realized, to give any sense of what these stories mean, the Bible is so coherent. It is such a densely woven tapestry. I have to give some sense of the whole. So I did dramatic retellings of famous stories, and then I tied in, listen, guys, here are all the interesting things that maybe you've never read that are so fascinating about the construction of these texts in the ancient world. And once upon a time, doing that was a popular interpretive genre. There are different versions of it, but rather than writing like a theological tome, a brilliant ancient teacher of the gospel would write a story.
Yeah.
And they would turn the theological theory into a speech. They would turn the point of the story into a dramatic action. So there's one called The Apocalypse of Abraham it's really about how a man who is embedded in the civilization of Ur and the worship of Naana, the ziggurat, came to faith in El Elyon. But rather than talking about all that, it has Abraham watching burning idols. And in that story, they made his father Terah an idol maker, so that they could have Abraham give this speech that is really just fascinating as a commentary on the biblical story, an exploration of the biblical story. And he says, "Is not my father rather the God of his gods, since they come into existence through his chisels and lathes? And should they not rather bow to him? What is this folly my father is doing?" It's such a compelling way to draw someone into the questions that the biblical narrative invites you to ask. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to give a sweep of, here is the story that we have to tell, while also inviting people to be a part of what God is doing in our time, which is this go to the well moment of go find the old way. Don't struggle to reinvent the wheel. You have a family, you have a history, you have a story. We do have to do some work to discover it, but I cannot tell you the relief that you will feel as the absolute coherence of the Christian worldview starts to become clear.
Feels so good. I love that.
It's amazing. And I keep coming back to, I guess, my personal takeaway from this conversation with you, both of you, is this. I think my favorite documentary is The Last Dance, Michael Jordan, Chicago Bulls. This
great documentary. Yes.
I love it. And I think it's one of the only documentaries or series that I've watched multiple times. And I think it's like, live like it's the last dance. At the beginning of that season, the GM, and there was team drama and all these outside factors. But the coach came in, Phil Jackson goes, "It's the last dance." Kind of like, "Hey, we'll do this one more time. Like, let's write an epic story." And we have a story, a narrative of God that he invites us into. But in our time, like secularism, in an age and needing spirituality, faith in Jesus, I think the call for me, for Micah, for Blaine, for the listener is to say, you know what? Live like it's the last dance. We don't know how much time we have. And it's just time to live on purpose, on mission, and write an amazing story with God. Are you up for a challenge? 5 questions, 5 minutes?
I'm ready. I have my question for you prepared.
Let's go. Okay. So first one is, I noticed this. You're not on social media. Is that intentional? Can I not find you? What's the scoop?
It's intentional. It may change as the desire grows in me to compete with the narratives of our time in a humble way. I got off social media a really long time ago. There was a movement in England called the Luddites that went around smashing cotton gins. They were, kind of promoters of cottage industry, a futile effort, but kind of awesome at the same time. And that spirit lives in me. I am suspicious of new technologies. I tend to avoid them and prefer old things. At the same time, it may change because, the big question right now is not so much what would I like to do, is Jesus, what are your orders?
That's good. That's good. All right. Question number 2, Blaine, what is the best advice you've ever been given?
Oh my gosh. Oh, it could go like this. The best advice that I've been given is, when the pain comes, lean in. I really would like the answer to be anything other than what it actually is when difficulty comes in my life and in our lives, which is that the path to resurrection leads to death. And there's so many places, over the past several years, is you get out of the teens, you get out of the 20s, start to get back in the 30s, and all of a sudden the energy runs out. Your family history comes up, all of this unforgiveness. You're like, what is happening to me? Well, actually, you're right on time. It's God's design that the energy would run out, that the outward journey would stop, so you could begin the inward journey, and it will take you where you do not want to go. But God will be faithful as you go there. So I ask a friend of mine, a mentor often, like, man, what's the solution to this? And he'll say, this, Blaine, it's a lot of hugging and crying, man. Like, I know you don't want to get mushy and actually kind of do the work, but you will eventually have to if you want the joy that you're after. So when the pain comes, lean in. Don't try to ignore it, overcome it, power through it. Those can all be fine things in season, but also accept the invitation of God to put your roots down into his story.
That's good. Wow.
Oh my gosh.
I've never heard anybody say that. That's incredible.
I'm enjoying our conversation. It's fun, Blaine. And if you could throw us a curveball that we have no clue what's coming, that you're going to ask us a question.
I have to be able to answer it. I can't phone a friend, just so you know. I need to be able
to. Okay, great. You talked about Daniel and said that we have to bow when others are standing and stand when others bow. Where are you standing where others bow right now? Or where are you afraid that you will have to stand where others bow right now?
Oh, man. I think literally I'm a little bit like you. Like, I'm more old school. I'm like, I don't even want to be on social media, but God has asked me to do that. He laid that on my heart about 5 to 7 years ago. Like, you need to be on social media. And not that I'm making this huge and crazy impact, but I'm like, okay, God, if you said it, I'll do it. If you said it, I'll do it. And I think how and who he's called us to be has not yet been done the way we feel that God's called us to do it. Like, we haven't found anybody who has a similar calling. So I think even as a pioneer, and you feel like you're in the fields and you're looking up and everybody's looking at you like, wow, you're crazy. Wow. Did God really say to do that? And I guess I would rather live in fear of God than fear of man. So I think there's an immediate obedience factor that has to come. And I've physically been in rooms or in church settings where I felt like thousands of people are worshiping in their seats and staring at the stage while worship session's happening. And God's like, stand. And I'm like, but everybody is literally sitting. And he's like, stand and worship me. And I was a guest at a church, and I felt like that Holy Spirit prompting. And I just stood and worshiped, and everybody else just sat with their mouths closed. And God said in that moment, he's like, you will bow when everybody else stands, and you will stand when everybody else bows. Do not be afraid, because who put them in the fiery furnace? If you're ever in the furnace, I will be there. So I think it's an inward strengthening. I don't know if that answers the question, but I just think that there are moments where it's like, we can't live in fear. Like, are we afraid of being canceled? Are we afraid of being X, Y, and Z? It's like, you know what? God did the ultimate sacrifice. And if I'm not willing to help bridge that gap, because I'm not God, I'm not the Holy Spirit, but if he says it, I will do it no matter how uncomfortable it is. And he will give me the strength to do it as I say yes. I don't know if that makes sense.
So good. That was great. I've had that experience too of standing in church, but mine was accidental. So good on you for practicing. That's such good practice. And a beautiful story with God. Good answer.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing.
Do you have the same one for Josiah or something different?
Well, I kind of want to hear the same one. Can I have 2 questions?
No,
if you wanted to.
I would say, man, I think bowing and standing, I see our culture bowing before some idols and looking at the namesake, what my parents named me. I think evaluating like, wow, God, are there any idols, or what are the idols that have crept in my life? How do we take those down? How do we remove the high places? And I think even one, you mentioned and brought up homeschooling, and I was a public school kid. And I think that with the age of our kids, the day that we're living in, the state that we live in, I guess there's some concerns that I have. And so it's asking those questions. How do we not coddle our kids, but how do we protect our children, and how do we spiritually form our kids? And so I think that's where I don't want to just bow down to the idols of what culture or just, maybe even legislator, what they're saying, like, hey, this is where education is going. But I don't know the answer on that one, but I just know that we might have to take some stands or bow before Jesus, before Yahweh, and not be concerned with what people think, because I think that's really easy to be concerned about.
So good.
That's good. Oh, okay. Question number 4. If you could go on a road trip, where would you go, and what snack would you take?
That is a great question. My wife is a hippie. Her dad lives off the grid in a cabin he built with hand tools. So, like, she's so awesome. And when she bakes Christmas cookies, I have to put like honey and sugar on them afterwards because they're so good, but they're the thinking man's Christmas cookie. They're not there for the taking with the sweetness. So our road trip, but when we go on road trips, sometimes the wheels come off, and let's say my easy answer is I am a huge black licorice fan. I think that if you don't like it, you haven't experienced it in the right way, or you haven't experienced like black licorice, black chocolate, the things that are dark chocolate. I mean, black chocolate,
black chocolate,
the things that are quote have bitterness. And then a friend of ours who's in our basement right now is part of a neo-monastic order called the Order of the Mustard Seed. And one of their things, which is an ancient Christian idea, right, is the idea of pilgrimage. That's actually like a vital thing of, we all do pilgrimages. They all build our family story. They're a part of a sense of ourselves. So some family pilgrimages are like, oh, we do this camping, but it's actually the reforging of our family story every summer. I love asking people, but what are like the pilgrimages that help situate you with your ancestors? Like, you are named Josiah, and so I don't know, man, there might be some Josiah pilgrimages for you that reify that identity, places you must go. So there's a very famous abbey. I couldn't road trip there until I flew first, but you can take some ferries after you get to the UK. There's an abbey called Iona that played an amazing role in medieval Christianity at a key moment. That's part of the template of the story that my wife and I and kind of our crew feel invited into, where we say, what are we doing in the time of decline? We feel like it's well defined by a monastery, and asking if that spirit was alive now, what would they do? Okay, the technology is different, the moment is different, but the impulse to preserve the gospel, to teach, to make art, to send missionaries, how do we embody that in our moment? So I would take a pilgrimage to Iona eating black licorice.
Come on.
Great answer. That's fun.
So, I mean, you're a deep thinker. There's a reservoir that you're tapping into, and you have been the whole conversation. In the last question, 5 of 5, you even shared the story of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, go to the well. For the listener who feels like they're just getting started digging, or they want to prepare a reservoir for the future to be able to draw from, how do we go deeper?
Oh, great question. I would like to say that these things started in me by catching a vision and succeeding at being into a disciple of Jesus. It usually doesn't work that way. And it came from me. My parents are quite well-known Christian writers who have done a beautiful work impacting a generation. And it was through grappling with that legacy and with my family and with my own deep sense of inadequacy and a failed effort to soothe it that led me in to some of these questions. What does it mean to follow Jesus? What is the gospel? Do I want to? People say, wow, you've read so much about spiritual formation, which is true, but I just wanted to not be depressed anymore because I didn't want my kids to be raised by a depressed dad. And, when it goes on from 1 year into 2 years into 3, you really begin to ask, how do people change? And if I don't, but if not, can I still bear the fruit of joy for my family? Where do I start to look? So I'll give it, the answer is, guys, it's not that hard, is God is at work in our lives, right? And it's far easier to ask the question, where are you moving in my life to establish your kingdom where I can lean in? Most of us already know, slow down a bit, listen. It may be coming through the pain, but not always. I mean, it may be coming through desire to try something, through a sense of adventure. But I will say, the God who made the universe bought you with a price and loves you. His goal is to form you into the full image of Jesus. So ask, where are you moving in my life? You're doing this movement in the church right now to connect us with our history and express a more robust image. Where are you doing that in me? And then lean in, right? Because I know over 5 minutes, but Josiah, he tried the early reform and the law came on the way. So he worked with what he had and the law showed up. It was while the temple was being purified that they found the Proto-Deuteronomy or whatever it was that they found. They found the roadmap lying covered in dust among the old tax records. It often works that way, where you'll say, man, I will tell you, it would be so cool if God would deposit, which he can do, he just doesn't very often, the entire plan directly into your soul. It's more likely that there is this still small voice calling you that might look like, find a spiritual director, start a Bible study, go to counseling, quit one engagement and have a date night and start working through stuff in your marriage this year, right? There's something that reach out to your dad and tell him that you love him. Like, there's an invitation, lean in and the roadmap will come.
That's so good. I think it's a great way to leave us with a challenge getting into 2024, as well as a listener of really starting to dig deep and to dig deep within you and trusting the Lord that he has and is writing a story that he wants you to live. He wants you to enjoy. And I truly believe that we serve a God of adventure. And I think that we just need to embrace the adventure. Just like let go of the reins, stop trying to sit in the driver's seat, hop in the back seat if you need to, get in the passenger seat and buckle up, put your helmet on. Because when you say yes to God and you say, Lord, take me on a wild adventure, he will indeed surprise you. He will wow you. He will take you to the unknown places, figuratively, spiritually, and emotionally in your own soul, and hopefully put your feet on the ground. So when you do get that blueprint and you do have that roadmap in front of you, the next piece will be illuminated as time goes on. Just hold on to the truth, hold on to God, and hang on to his promises, because you are seen, you are known, you are loved, and you are adored by the Heavenly Father.
And I just got to jump in and say, Blaine, not only thank you for this conversation, but that last question, what you shared there, how vulnerable that was, that's so not lost on us. Sincerely, thank you for that.
You guys are welcome. Thanks for the generosity of this conversation. You two are wonderful. So congratulations on so many shows. And thank you guys. Thank you for fighting for a generation that is worth it. Man, it's not easy to pioneer, but what you get to see in the beauty of Jesus is amazing. So thanks for being out in front.
Oh my gosh. Amazing conversation today. The guest, Blaine Eldredge, one more time. You can find his book, The Paradise King, in the show notes. You're listening to the Young Adults Today podcast.